Readers, yesterday you did a lot of thinking work that helps you envision complex cause and effect relationships. You did most of this thinking off the top of your head, thinking about important events in your book, and then considering ways that cause and effect for those events got super complicated. And it can certainly pay off to sometimes close a book and think about what's important. Today, we'll explore some of the new reading and note taking work that helps you trace these kinds of complex relationships between parts of the text. What's tricky is you'll have to innovate some of this reading work because there is no formula for it. Today, I want to teach you that in more sophisticated literary nonfiction, authors rarely put the cause of something next to its effect. Instead, dozens or even hundreds of pages may separate related parts. It's up to the reader to come up with systems for noticing and keeping track of parts that connect. Let me show you how this works with the excerpt from Hidden Figures, the one in which Mary Jackson's supervisor told her she couldn't be an engineer. Yesterday, you realized that it wasn't just that the supervisor was getting in her way and keeping her from getting her degree. It was also that the classes were in an all-white high school and that there weren't many women in engineering to begin with. One thing you can do is ask, what kind of reading or rereading work would I do to figure out what led up to this? To figure out what causes have come up earlier in the book. Usually it helps to look way earlier in the text, not just a page or two before the big event. I skim over earlier parts in my mind. Sometimes I look at the chapter headings and remind myself of what happened in earlier chapters, and I consider if any parts might be related. Well, what about this part near the beginning of Hidden Figures, where the West computers are forced to sit in a segregated area in the cafeteria? I wonder if this part could be related. I'm going to read this short excerpt aloud. This kind of racial insult was all too common. It was a kind of subtle jab that African Americans had learned to tolerate, if not accept, in order to function in their daily lives. The women probably expected it, but in the environment of the laboratory, a place that had chosen them for their intellectual talents, the sign seemed particularly offensive. Rereading that part now, particularly in light of what we read yesterday, makes me think that this part could be related to Mary's supervisor telling her that she couldn't be an engineer. I didn't notice it on the first read through, and I really couldn't have because I didn't yet know about the effect. But it seems like this could be one of the causes of the supervisor's actions. Maybe the supervisor is so used to discrimination against African Americans because she sees it everywhere, the cafeteria, the drinking fountain, the bathroom, the bus, that she just assumes that's the way things have to be. I'll flag this part in the book, and later maybe I'll create a diagram or something in my notebook to show how all these causes and effects connect. I could imagine showing what Mary's supervisor did in the center, and then showing all these causes and effects branching out of it. Maybe I'll even include a quote from this part that really shows this cause. Probably this kind of racial insult was all too common. Readers, are you seeing how authors rarely put causes next to their effects? Instead, I had to think back across tons of pages, skimming them over in my mind and looking at chapter headings to remember what happened in earlier chapters, on the lookout for parts that might be related. When I found parts that connected, I had to come up with a system to keep track of those parts. This all requires innovation because there's not one cut and dry way this could go. Readers, are you ready to innovate? If you wanted to consider what else might have happened as a result, What reading work would you do? I want you to think for a minute, pause the video, and in your reading notebook, brainstorm some possible ideas. Readers, you probably noted that to find other results, we definitely have to read on. I'll read on past the scene we studied yesterday, and will you think, what parts should we flag? What parts seem to indicate something else that might have happened as a result? The disappointment of Hampton High School. Mary Jackson had passed the old Hampton High School too many times to count. The building was located in the middle of the city, not far from her house, but she had never set foot inside. On her first night of class in the spring of 1956, Mary was nervous. Her classmates were the same people she had worked with during the day for the past 5 years, but she was anxious about meeting with them outside of the Langley campus. The thought of entering the whites-only school also worried Mary. Nothing could have prepared her for the shock she experienced when she walked through the door. Hampton High School was a dilapidated, musty old building. Mary Jackson was stunned. This was what she and the rest of the black children in the city had been denied all these years. She had assumed that if whites had worked so hard to deny her admission to the school, it must have been a beautiful place. But this? What a nonsensical thing that black and whites went to different schools. If the city had combined its resources, it could have built one beautiful school for both black and white students. Throughout the South, cities had maintained two separate and inefficient school systems, which shortchanged both black and white students. Readers, are you thinking about that question? What reading work would you do here to think about other effects? What parts might you flag? Or how would you connect these? Take a second and think about those questions. Readers, the connections aren't always immediately apparent. Sometimes you have to push yourself to consider how a part might possibly connect. And if you're talking about a part in general, you're going to need to try to recall the specific details that you would flag. And you'll need to start a system for keeping track of parts that connect in your book. Maybe a visual, or a system of cause and effect post-its, or timelines in your notebooks. Let me share one idea that I've heard in the past. See if your thinking matches. One part that you might flag would be the part where Mary was stunned about how old and dilapidated the whites only school building was. That effect seemed pretty unexpected. And you might be thinking that you could use post-its to show all the cause and effect connections. And that on each post-it note, you'd write either cause or effect, and then write a key line from the text that captured that cause and effect. I thought this was a creative idea and a great way to keep track of your notes without having to do as much rereading and going back through a lengthy chapter book. Readers, as you head off today, it will be up to you to figure out how to trace the complex cause and effect relationships between parts of the text, because there's no formula for how to do that. Instead, you'll have to innovate to figure out the systems that will help you notice and keep track of parts that connect across dozens, maybe even hundreds of pages. Take a minute and brainstorm how you'll do this work. Are you already imagining systems that will work for you, or will you invent a system as you read? When you have a plan, head off to get started.